Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from. I hope you're doing well this morning. For me, um, I usually don't do videos, but every now and again, I just get this feeling in my spirit that I need to share something with the hopes that somebody else is going to be encouraged and edified and probably learn something from what I'm also learning in life. So, one of the things that I get asked a lot is what is a typical day in, what does a typical day in Mercy's life look like? Like, what does it mean to be a scientist, a researcher, an educator, and all of the above, right? And so I get asked that a lot. And also, I get asked apparently, like, I've had a few successes in my career as an early career scientist. And a lot of people usually comment about just, how successful I've been in the last couple of years and so on and so forth. But a lot of the times, people don't actually ask about the journey to getting to where you're trying to go. And there is this notion that success and failure cannot coexist. And that's what I want us to talk about today, right? Can success and failure coexist? Or can you have some wins in one area and still have some losses in another area of your life? And that's perfectly fine. So, a lot of what I do as a researcher and a scientist is securing funding to do the projects that I want to do. And as you grow as a scientist, you learn that getting funding to support your programs of research becomes even more important for you to reach more people and to have the type of impact that you want to see to be able to move the needle in terms of adding to the scientific body of literature and so on and so forth. But the grant writing process is a gruesome process. And there are a lot of things that go into whether or not you get funded at the end of the day. So, most of you know I work in large multidisciplinary teams, and I work with people from all across campus and all across the US as well. And of course, I'm trying to grow my global partnerships and global collaborations. But what ends up happening is our teams usually submit a lot of grants between December and May. And that's just like our grant writing period. And I think that everything has just turned out that way with the academic year and how, teaching falls into all of this and so on and so forth. So our teams, we tend to write a lot between those months. Now, for some of you who may not be aware of like the grant writing process, it's a really, it's a really gruesome process. It's a lot of writing. It's a lot of researching and so on and so forth. It's a lot of collaboration. But so this year during our grant writing cycle, all the teams that I work with, we actually submitted 8 large grants. That's a lot of writing. So first of all, I give kudos to all our teams, all the people that I work with, that we were even able to submit 8 big grants. So what happens in the grant writing world? Of course, there are 2 outcomes, right? You can either get funded, which is great, and you're like, yay, we've been funded, and now the work begins, so let's start doing the work. And then there's the other outcome of you don't get funded. But within the subset of grants that don't get funded, grants don't get funded for a variety of reasons. And so I want to talk to us about some of those things and some of the lessons I've learned through that. So, like I shared, we wrote 8 different grants. 4 of those, I was what's called a principal investigator. And what that means basically is that you're the person who's taking the lead and making sure that everything comes together. And if you're funded, that you'll be the person responsible for actually making sure the team is working toward the objectives of the funding opportunity that you've been funded for, and that you're implementing the programs and the research in the way that you told the people who gave you the money that you were going to do it. So of the 4 that I was actually a principal investigator, and then the other 4 I helped my colleagues and friends who were principal investigators, and I was serving in a more of a supportive role to help them get their funding. And hopefully once they're funded, that, I'll be there to help them do whatever it is that they gave me to do based on my expertise and experience. So the 4 that I was a principal investigator on, I had 1 that was funded, and then I had 3 that were not funded. So in no particular order, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why those were not funded and the lessons I think that we can all draw from that. Sometimes I think that people put a lot of pressure on themselves, and apparently there's this notion that once you get to a certain level, which honestly, I don't know what that level is, that you're immune to losses and you're immune to failures and all of that, which is so wrong and could not be farther from the truth. And it actually puts a lot of people at risk for a lot of anxiety, depression, and many other mental health problems because they have this unrealistic expectation about life. Life is really a series of challenges, a series of successes, a series of wins, and a series of losses. It's really about making sure that you're taking the right perspective and understanding life as it happens within the context and the confines of what you have been afforded to live with, right? So the first one that we're going to talk about, the first grant that did get funded, actually did not get discussed. So for my friends who are not in academia or in the grant writing world, what that means is every time that a funding agency puts out a call for applications to be submitted to be considered for funding, once they get all the applications together, because sometimes they receive so many applications, and so the funding agency has to rank all the grants that were submitted based on what the reviewers who looked at them said and rank them from top to bottom. And usually, and this can be varied, it depends on a lot of things, but most of the times they'll now go and look at the top 50%, and then they'll discuss them in a meeting where other scientists come together and review the merit of the proposal and say, we think that this will be a great proposal to fund because ABCD, here's the impact it's going to have in the scientific world, and here is the potential significance of the findings, that if these investigators were successful, this is what they're going to be able to achieve, and here's how it's going to move the science forward if they were actually successful. And then there are other things that they look at, like the team that's proposing the work. Do they have the expertise that they need? And do they have the infrastructure that they need to actually conduct the study or the programs as they've been proposed? And so many other things. We won't go into that. It's not a grant writing lecture, right? But yeah, so there are all of these things that come together, and now they pick the top 50% that get discussed, and the bottom 50% don't actually get discussed. So the first grant that we're talking about, it was actually not discussed. Our grant was not discussed, which means it wasn't in the top 50% of whoever submitted something that time around, right? When I looked at the summary statement, so they'll always give you a summary statement to say what your weaknesses were, what your strengths were. What became apparent to me was that we were not favorably scored for that grant because it was a little bit premature for us to be to do what we were saying we wanted to do, because we wanted to adopt an intervention that's currently being tested for effectiveness and we haven't completed the other study. So the reviewer said, well, this is a great concept, but we just think that it's premature for this team to try to adopt it and implement it again. So the lesson from that, I guess, is that sometimes even when you have really great ideas and you've done everything correctly, you have the right team, you have the right expertise, you can do this effectively, sometimes it's just not the right time. And oftentimes people beat themselves up when it's just not the right time. Even the Bible says that to everything there's a time and a season. In Ecclesiastes, it says there's a time to plant, there's a time to pluck out, there's a time to be born, a time to die. And oftentimes as people, we don't understand that there are seasons in life in which something just fits. And so that's the lesson. That's lesson number one. Sometimes it's not that you're not doing a good job. It's just that it's not the right time, and that's okay. And the other reason why it's okay for it to not be the right time is sometimes when you do something prematurely, you don't actually get the benefits of what that thing could have been if you had let it just mature. So don't be in a hurry to do some things in life. Let it mature. Let it sit there. Sit with it. Practice patience and grow from that process of waiting for something to mature and be ripe. Just like fruits. Fruits are sweet and nice, but before they're ripe, they really taste bad. So don't be in a hurry to make it happen. That's lesson number one. The second grant that we applied for was actually scored, and it scored in the top 50% percentile. So it was actually discussed. However, it didn't end up getting funded. And after reviewing the summary statement for why, trying to understand the reasons why it was not funded, it became apparent to me that really for that one, we were missing an important piece of expertise that we really needed to make the project successful. The other thing that was missing was we needed a particular type of community partner because the project had a large implementation science component to it. We were missing a bit of a community partner that would have been helpful for us to have on board before that the application was put in place. So the lesson from that is no man is an island. And in as much as you can be successful, in as much as you have all this great expertise, we had a really good team. But sometimes there's just that missing component that if you don't have it, you don't have the same impact that you could potentially have. And sometimes it's a matter of just explaining things better, because some of those components that, the reviewers had questions about, I think that they were in the proposal. Maybe we just didn't do a good job with explaining it. So the lesson from that, like I said, no man is an island. We all need different people, and you cannot be an expert at everything. So always be willing to look very critically at your team, at yourself, and be honest about the help that you need to bring to your table as you're trying to grow as a professional, as a person, to make sure that you're well-rounded and that whatever you're trying to do can actually be successful because you have the expertise that is needed to be successful. And the other lesson from that is that, sometimes we tend to think that just because we've done a good job that something should happen. However, there's so much more that goes into being successful, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? Being successful, quote unquote, than just you as a person or your team. There are a lot of other factors to be considered. The next grant that was not funded actually scored really high and scored within what I would call a fundable range. The only problem that was there was that the funding agency was using a different type of mechanism this time in how they disperse funds. So I was actually pretty bummed about this one because I was like, man, this was such a really good score. And when we looked at all the feedback that we received, like it was all strengths and no weaknesses. So it was kind of mind boggling to think, well, we had all of these strengths, no identified weaknesses, but we still didn't get funded. So the lesson from that is sometimes you do everything right. You cross all your T's, you dot all your I's, but somebody else making a decision may not just pick you or may not just pick your idea. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's life, because sometimes we feel like just because I did a good job, I should be entitled to a particular outcome. Again, the Bible says time and chance happens to them all, right? So you have to know that sometimes it's about just the season, sometimes it's about favor, sometimes about chance, and sometimes it's about you. But don't take things like that personally when you know you did put your best foot forward and something didn't just work. So I'm actually I'm actually not mad about that outcome, because I'm like, wow, we scored so well. And when we talk to our program officer, like the people that manage those grant portfolios, of course I can't get into like our discussion and all of that, but really that person was like, you had such a great proposal and it was one of the highly ranked proposals. However, we just used a different mechanism to fund this time and you guys didn't get funded. I can't, like I said, I can't get into like all the details of that, but I walked away from that conversation feeling, wow, we have perfected the art, I think. We have perfected the art of grant writing. And I think the takeaway message from that for me is sometimes it's about the process, not the outcome. A lot of the times we're so stuck on the outcome. What is coming out of this? What am I going to get out of this? What is in it for me, kind of thing. But sometimes it's not the outcome, it's the process. And I can tell you that as a team, we learned so much from putting that grant together. We became closer as colleagues and scientists and friends. And we really learned so much about the grant writing process in that process of writing that grant, such that we did such a great job. The outcome was not great, but the process and the lessons that we learned through that process of writing that grant are far more beyond what we could have ever hoped for. So here's the lesson. Sometimes just be okay with the learning process. As a person, as an individual, you're going to learn so many things in life. And sometimes they don't always result in what you want, but you've learned so much through the process. You've become a better person. You've become a better scientist, or whatever it is that you do. Process trumps outcomes sometimes, because what we've learned, the skills we've developed, those are skills that we can apply to many other different scenarios. We're better for it as a team. We're stronger for it as a team. We didn't get the outcome we wanted, but the process was worth going through, and we've learned so much. So don't be afraid to go through the process without the intended outcome. That's absolutely fine. That's lesson number 3, or maybe number 6 at this point. I think with every scenario, there's been like 1 or 2 lessons to be learned. But whatever number we're at, that was a lesson. Then the other one that we submitted actually got funded. So for my friends who are not in academia and in the scientific world, this particular grant that was funded, it's called an R01, or a Merit Investigator Initiated Grant. And this is in my opinion, in the scientific world, opinion, this is one of the hardest grants to actually get funded. And we got funded. Now, the good news is not that we got funded. Again, process over outcome, right? One of the things that, yes, maybe I'm a nerd, I'm a geek, whatever. But one of the things that really made me excited about this particular R01 grant that got funded is, on top of it being funded, we really scored in the top 1%, y'all. Top 1% of everybody that applied to that call and was reviewed during that season. We were in the top 1%. That means we did an excellent job writing that grant. We did an excellent job talking about the potential impact that our work could have in the communities and in the lives of people that we serve. That means we did a good job bringing the right team together and just making sure we had all the expertise that we needed. We had all the community partners that we needed, making sure that the significance of our project was well articulated. We did an excellent job, y'all. As a young, well, I try to think of myself as a young scientist. As a young scientist who's still growing, to get an R01 be scored in the top 1% of whatever was, submitted that time around is such a huge validation of the process that has happened over the last 5 years. So sometimes the lesson in this is you just have to bask in the moments of victory. Regardless of whatever else is happening in your life, learn to bask in the successes and enjoy those successes. Pat yourself on the back. Say, you go Mercy, you guys did a great job. Top 1%, that rarely happens. For an R01, even for a young investigator scientist like you, that is amazing. And sometimes, the Bible says David encouraged himself. Sometimes we're waiting for people to pat us on the back and say, go Mercy, or go, you did a great job. Sometimes you just have to celebrate. And I think the overall lesson out of this is you have to look at life through the lens of perspective and context. And it's always better to look at life as a glass that is half full than a glass that is half empty. Perspective matters, context matters, and you're going to have successes, you're going to have failures. And in fact, I don't like to call them failures. I like to call them opportunities for improvement. And that's because just because it didn't work this time doesn't mean it won't work the next time. And honestly, the life of a scientist, the life of a researcher, it's a lot of rejection. And that's what I tell people. Even if we're not talking about grants, we're talking about manuscripts, writing manuscripts. I have 50 publications. That's not a lot for other people, but man, that's a lot for me. I have 50 publications, and out of the 50, I can tell you that only 2 in my whole writing career, only 2 have ever been accepted through a peer review process as was. Every single time there are revisions. Every single time there's, you can fix this. And there are times when it's just utter rejection. I've even gotten manuscripts that were desk rejects. And what that means is that it didn't even get sent out to peer review. The editor looked at it and they said, this is not what we're looking for at this time. It doesn't meet the scope of our work, or it's just not what we're interested in right now. So we're not even going to send it out to peer review and waste more of your time, or even waste more of our reviewers' time, kind of thing. And that's okay. You just take it back, get the feedback, turn it around, send it somewhere else that might be a better fit, and that's okay. So in life, you're going to have rejections, you're going to have losses, you're going to have failures, and that's fine. I think what happens these days is a lot of us just talk about our highlights of the successes. We never really talk about the things that we could have done better or the things that didn't work out. And so we have a massive number of people looking at us thinking, oh my God, this person is always winning. And that is so far from the truth. And we're making people go crazy. We're making people feel like they need to be something that they're not. And so I'm hoping that by sharing this video, that, somebody else may look at their life today and maybe they had some losses and they can feel like, well, it's not the end of the world. And even if I had losses in this area, I had successes in another area, and let me celebrate those successes. I'll come back to the losses and the failures and whatever to really look at the lessons I can learn from that and improve and become better. And that's fine. We can do that at a later time. But here's the other caveat. I told you guys that we submitted 8 grants. So 4, I was PI. The other 4, my other friends were PI. My other friends and colleagues were PI. And of the other 4, 3 of my friends, of course, I was like what we call a co-investigator, and I helped them with their grants. I helped them write them up, and I helped them think through things and so on and so forth, right? But 3 of my other friends who we wrote grants with, that I was in a more of a supportive role as a co-investigator, not a principal investigator, they got funded. Oh my God, that's amazing. So now I'm so happy for my friends who got funded, but I also know that with them being funded, that means I also have to still do the work that I said I was going to do to help them be successful. So that's a whole other thing, right? So out of 8 grants that we submitted in our grant writing season, 4 were funded, 4 were not. Man, that's like a 50% success rate. Now, that may not mean a lot to some of you, but in the world of grant writing, the average funding rate is 10%. For our teams to have 5 times that success is amazing. And so instead of just focusing on the ones that did get funded, how about we focus on the ones that got funded? We have 4 amazing opportunities to change the lives of people, to contribute to science, and really move the needle forward in terms of how we think about, people with substance use disorders, and how we put services together, and all of these other different things that we're going to be doing with the 4 grants that have been funded, right? So let's focus on that. And then let's go back later and look at what we can do with the other ones, whether we need to turn them around and send them back in, whatever we need to do. But the point is, we're so busy, right? And so one of my mentors actually called me and she was like, so how do you feel about the other 3 not being funded? And I'm like, you know what? I am actually not mad. The reason I'm not mad is, first of all, I'm still basking in the fact that I wrote a grant with a team of some amazing people, and we got scored in the top 1%. That is awesome. And we got funded, and we have the opportunity to change lives with the money that we're going to receive. And then I wrote another grant that scored so well with my friends. We wrote this grant that scored so well. The circumstances didn't work out for us to be funded. I feel good about the process that we went through. The next one, we had a few minor mistakes, but honestly, it was not like it was, like a really bad grant. Then I would feel really bad that we didn't even take the time to write a good product, that we didn't take the time to send out a good product. And there's so many lessons to be learned through all of these different outcomes. And so I feel pretty good. And honestly, our teams are so busy right now. If we had even just another one funded, we would be busy. It's a good type of busy, but we would be absolutely busy. And so I want to think that, some of them not being funded is actually in our best interest at this point, because we'll be running around like headless chickens or something. So there's always caveat, there's always a silver lining. Don't put yourself under pressure. I've seen so many people put themselves under pressure to achieve, under pressure to do whatever it is that you're putting yourself under pressure for. And that results in poor mental health, poor physical health, and sometimes even drives people to do illegal things because they just want breakthrough, right? Breakthrough. We want breakthrough. Do not, I think it was about a year ago, I said something on one of my Facebook posts, and I said, always chase purpose. If you chase purpose and potential for impact, you will find that everything comes together so well, and life becomes so much easier and happier than if you're just trying to compete with other people or compare yourself to other people. How about discover purpose? How about discover what is important to you? And sometimes it's okay for success and failure to coexist. You have wins and you have losses, and that's fine. So anyway, this has taken longer than I thought it was going to take, but I hope that, somebody is encouraged. If you've had some losses in your life, that's fine. If you've had some successes, yay, let's celebrate. That's amazing. But all of it, honestly, the Bible says all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So if you know, as a matter of fact, that you're called according to his purpose, celebrate in all the successes, celebrate in all the failures or opportunities for improvement, and challenge yourself to be a better person every day. And remember that sometimes process is more important than outcomes. And sometimes, regardless of what you do, things just don't turn out the way that you want them to. You can cross your T's, dot your I's, and the outcome will be completely different, and that's okay. So anyway, I'm off to go to work. I hope you'll have a wonderful day. Stay blessed, be comfortable in your skin, discover purpose, have some impact. And you don't need a big global platform. You just need to be you, and you just need to embrace the authentic self that God created you to be. All right, y'all, love you so much. Have fun. Remember to love God. Remember to love people, and be comfortable in your own skin. Bye.